Hi, welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm an arts programmer and cultural critic in Toronto, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Sam Rice Edwards, an editor whose credits include Whitney, The Rescue, and Meet Me in the Bathroom. His latest project is 1-to-1, John and Yoko, a documentary about John Lennon and Yoko Ono's time in New York in the early 1970s, which reunites Sam with Kevin MacDonald, his collaborator on Whitney. They co-directed this one, which is now playing in theaters in North America and the UK, and even had an IMAX run last week. And Sam chose Don't Look Now, Nicolas Roeg's remarkable 1973 genre piece starring Donald Sutherland and Julie Christie as John and Laura Baxter, an English couple mourning the death of their young daughter who traveled to Venice, where John is supervising the restoration of a cathedral. It's supposed to be an escape for the couple, but strange visions lead John to believe they're literally being haunted by their lost child, which is awful if that's what's really happening, and even worse if it's not. Embraced by critics and audiences as an almost experimental look at grief, faith, and destiny, Don't Look Now is a towering work that continues to bewitch and disturb more than half a century later, thanks only in part to its truly shocking ending. We'll be discussing that. You've been warned. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Well, I think Nicolas Roeg is a director who is really, really underrated in cinema. I've seen a number of his films sort of randomly, never really actually set out to go and see a Nicolas Roeg film. I just happened to catch them. And I was always kind of captivated when I was younger by his films. And I could tell quite quickly, oh, hang on, this is a film made by that person who made that other film. I could see, you could see quite clearly the style. And there was something about them that I found very free and exciting, because I think really, it's a hard thing to express, but I think the sort of non-linear and, I guess what you call associative editing, putting images together that don't necessarily normally live together, but somehow creating some sense by doing that. I found that really, really exciting, because I think what it was doing is it was taking us away from the kind of logical into the subconscious a little bit. And I just found that a much more emotional experience. So, once I had seen that, it kind of, I couldn't turn my back on that. And I've always been attracted to that kind of realm of cinema and film. And it's quite a hard one to define, really, because what do you call it? I guess some people call it poetic, but that doesn't sound very good, so it's quite a hard thing to define, but it definitely opened my eyes to that and really kind of drew me actually into film.
It's associative is a great term for it, because it's not one that's thrown around very often, but he does have the ability to draw us from a thought to a thought without any direct exposition or dialogue. The presence of water and the color red, the really, he's landing very heavily on symbolism and foreshadowing. But if all time is happening at once in the course of the edit, can you even call it foreshadowing, right? Like, we're sort of immersed in this associative space where, much like performance, we have to infer meaning from the structure that's presented to us. The first time I saw it, I was way too young. And I think it had just come out on video or something. So I would have been 12 or 13, and I was renting things I probably shouldn't have been renting. And of course, and it was frustrating and fascinating and grown up in a way that I absolutely was not ready for. But it was a magnificent experience, because it's terrifying when you don't fully understand the rhythms of a horror film. And I'm not even sure Don't Look Now counts as horror. I think it is sort of the extension of the British Italian crossover Giallo, whatever thing was going on at the time. And the other thing I love about the film is the trivia note that it was released as the top half of a double bill with The Wicker Man, which
I didn't know that. How interesting.
No, it makes no sense to me, but also makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it is a horror, as you say, but it isn't at the same time. I'm not, certainly when I was younger, I saw it at a very young age as well. And when I was younger, I was quite scared of horrors, and I didn't, I definitely wouldn't have been drawn into a horror as such, but I could feel that there was something more sophisticated here and deeper. And although it's very extremely sad and scary at times, it was, that there's also something very beautiful about it, and that's a kind of strange, heady mix in a film. So, it wasn't, it definitely felt, it didn't feel horrific to me, strangely at a young age.
It's beguiling, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
beguiling is a good word. Yeah.
it draws you in, and I think the fact that Sutherland is the lead. The other thing that makes no sense to me is that I believe this was originally pitched for, I think it was Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood. They wanted a real life couple for the adaptation, and I don't, I don't. I mean, obviously, casting Natalie Wood retroactively in a sad movie about the inevitability of death and drowning is hard to even
Yeah.
communicate to people.
Yeah.
But Christie and Sutherland have this sort of genteel warmth that works so well to make them tragic figures even before we understand what the tragedies are. The fact that they are recovering from an unthinkable loss, a very personal loss. In the short story, it was meningitis, and their child had simply been one of hundreds or thousands of young deaths, as was the style of the time, and making it a drowning and tying it to John's business of restoration and architecture. Like, he should have known that that was dangerous, and all these little missed things, which serve to give them this weight, this unspoken dramatic weight, and then to follow them into this darkness, this new darkness of the story, without telling us what to believe or what to hold on to. And Roeg gives us almost nothing. He gives us too much, which works to give us nothing. And watching it again, I just found that it's such an incredible, it's a dislocating experience, not knowing what we can believe, what we see, and then learning, spoilers for people who haven't seen the film, that, oh, it's all happening. Everything is real. We just didn't figure out the order of it.
Yeah.
And it traps us in John's perspective, which of course is, I think, why it works so well, because no one could do broken woe better than Donald Sutherland. I mean, he looks like he's crying even when he's smiling. He's just this incredible face, but also not an Englishman. He's Canadian. There's something else going on. There's another level of separation that just puts us slightly off. The whole film is an exercise in the uncanny valley. It's just that nobody knew that was what it was going to be called.
No, no, absolutely. And I think, as you say, it is all ultimately reality, but it does feel a bit like a dream, a sort of very introspective kind of feeling to the film. And I think it's so clever how that's achieved. I mean, obviously, a lot of it is in the cinematography and the amazing shots they get, but you mentioned the kind of way it's cut non-linear a lot of the time, and that gives it this kind of dreamy quality, but also, a lot of the time there's kind of little details picked up, right at the beginning, obviously with the drowning, the like very, very sad drowning of Donald Sutherland's character's daughter, that cut against the in cutting his finger and getting blood on the slide. And that little detail has, all the details have a huge amount of meaning. And so it's that in itself gives it this kind of very, very kind of bizarre feeling where the clues are all about us, about our lives, about the future, about the past, but you've just got to look at these little details.
I'm still not totally sure where the title comes from, or what the meaning of the title is supposed to be, because it feels like an attempt, and it is the original short stories title, so it's not a tweak to the material, but it feels like a taunt, and nothing about the film is taunting us. Like, it's something weird and ambiguous, and it's the perfect phrase because it's meaningless as well, right? I mean, it's a movie. We can't not look. If it's advice to us, if it's advice to John, does it mean don't look now, look later, look earlier? What is he not supposed to see? Because it's a warning. The title is a warning, but I don't know to whom it applies, and I've wondered about that forever. I do know that the
It is interesting because there's also a sort of, it could be a kind of pastiche of a horror title, you know,
yeah,
like a sort of B movie type title, but it's obviously, not that at all. So
no, it's strangely
interesting.
evocative in a way that helps no one.
Yeah, yeah.
So, sorry, you had said you saw it when you were young. Did you? I forgot to ask. Did you see it theatrically or on video? Was
No,
it?
no, I saw it on video, and actually that's the thing. That's a sort of regret in some way that I've never seen a Nicolas Roeg film theatrically. I just happened to catch them at sort of various times, and on television, and as I said, a lot of the time it was, I didn't know at first it was one of his films, but then I started realizing. Um, so it's definitely a sort of cinematic pilgrimage I need to do. My bucket list needs to be to see as many of them in a cinema as possible.
Yeah,
Uh,
I now that you mention it, I'm not so sure I've seen that many
mm,
myself in theaters. I've seen Don't Look Now. I caught it at Rep years later, with an audience that I think everyone in the theater had already seen the film. This would have been the late 80s or early 90s, in this great big lovely theater called the Bloor in Toronto, which had terrible sound. And what was so interesting was that it the dialogue is almost meaningless, that there's nothing is said that is terribly important. There are warnings
mm,
everywhere, but no one listens to them. It's got a great soundtrack. The atmosphere, noise, everything. The sounds inside the church are especially unsettling. Something is always creaking or cracking or trembling, and it makes you feel like the world is about to fall apart around John, which is, of course, how he feels all the time. But the audience just, we all knew what was going to happen, and it was just this collective experience of, right, yes, we know this, and still being pulled into it and caught up in it. I don't think, because I can usually spot the audience members who haven't seen a film for the first time because they'll react genuinely,
yeah.
and it just played to this sort of appreciative silence, which almost sounds pretentious, but it didn't. I didn't care. It worked. It still plays, and when it's that big, it's it's so much more impactful to just look at their faces on that scale.
I think you said something sort of very interesting there, that the dialogue is, almost incidental in the film, and I think that's very true. It's a truly cinematic film in that, it's extremely visual and it tells the story visually. It's almost like an extremely slow narrative montage.
Yeah, yeah.
No, and I think that there's there's something extremely magical about that, because I think it frees the filmmaker up from the usual, restrictions from, telling a story in sort of real life, as it were, and an action cut here and all of this, just all of those are gone. Obviously there are sequences that are absolutely in reality, but they can suddenly you can be cut against a really unexpected shot. So I think it must have been, I mean, an amazing experience to be making the film, and certainly editing the film. I would have loved, I mean, obviously, I would have absolutely have loved to have done that, because I think it must have just been such an inspiring project to work on.
And the editor became a director himself, Graham Clifford, who directed Francis and a Christian Slater film called Gleaming the Cube, which only exists as a joke title these days. But he's so important to what Rogue is doing, as is Pino Donaggio. I didn't want to discount the score because that is,
Yeah.
I think, more important than the dialogue for the most part, just in telling us where what to feel and how to feel. We're on edge every time the music comes in because it's beautiful, it's sumptuous, it's symphonic, and it's threatening
Mm,
in a way that only the audience can hear. I mean, I that's the other thing too, that this film, more than most of Rogue's other work, feels like an active communication to the viewer rather than the characters. The, we are we are watching John watch. We are subject to his visions, and like the film forces us into his point of view, but
yeah.
the additional cutting, most famously in the love scene, dislocates us in time even more than the characters. and forces us to look for meaning. He's sort of training us
Yeah,
to understand where this whole story is going.
the language of that film. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you're absolutely right. It draws the viewer in, and I think part of it is the instant experience of these cuts that are very unexpected put together. I mean, that is an experience for the viewer. So we, in a way, are kind of experiencing something that John is experiencing, and the culmination of having that over 2 hours. I can't remember exactly. I think it's over 2 hours, but we are slowly drawn into the film.
And then that just makes the payoff land. It brings the whole story into focus with such sadness, right?
Yeah,
It is shocking, I'm sure. I remember the first time through not being fully able to comprehend the little person
yeah,
because she's distorted as well. She's covered in makeup, and that's a shock. But the thing I always come back to is how odd it is that, and again, spoiler, she seems sad. She seems so mournful
mm,
as she murders a man, whatever
yeah,
this
yeah,
is.
mm,
Maybe she doesn't have any agency in it at all either. I mean,
mm,
some part of me wonders, it's nowhere in the text, but John can't be, I mean, he's not. I mean, demonstrably, he's not the only person with psychic ability in this film. There's the
mm.
sister, the psychic sister. What if this, what if this person, what if the murderer is disappointed that he showed up? That,
Yeah.
that this is all predestined, that all of this is happening against everyone's will. And
Mm,
it's an inexplicable direction. I don't know why Roeg chose to do that, but it has fascinated me for 40 years.
yeah, yeah. It feels very much a mystery. I actually, I remember watching it. Well, I mean, I've obviously seen it a number of times, and one time I watched it with a friend. Um, and for some reason, I said to him, this is a scary film, this, and he, halfway through, he was sort of, I don't know if he was trying to be macho or not, but he's like, it's not that scary. And I was like, okay, and went on, and then that moment at the end, he was absolutely floored by it. But it's a real shock. And I think part of the reason that it's a shock is that we've been drawn in, and we're so emotionally, it's not a classic horror, as we were saying. We sympathize with the characters, we're drawn into their world. We've been sort of, almost hypnotized by this, associative editing kind of feel to the whole film. And so we're very emotionally open, I think, when that moment hits, and it really is impactful as a result.
Hey, it's Norm interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming project. Last week, I wrote about Arrow's truly amazing 4K special edition of Rennie Harlan's unsung masterpiece, The Long Kiss Goodnight. Yes, really. And there's a lot more coming this week. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I mean, I wish I could have seen it with an audience in 1973. I would have been 5, and it would have scarred me for life. The experience of people who had no idea what was coming, and even if you'd read the short story, which does end the same way, it's so different to experience it on screen, and the pacing is so, yeah, that you're lulled in. You're not. It's not a roller coaster. It's a puzzle to be solved, and then you don't even realize how invested you are by the time that thing comes at you. It's
Yeah.
and then again, to just end it with another piece of direction on Rogue's part. He told Christie to smile. He told Julie Christie to look happy in the funeral sequence.
Mhm.
And there are multiple interpretations of what that means, but it's just something where the apparent wrongness of that moment seems to open up an entirely new world within the story. Just
Yeah.
this guy was a cameraman. I mean, it's incredible that he became a director of such texture and subtlety. In that, like most
Layer.
cinematographers who become directors, and there aren't that many, but most cinematographers tend to go for flash, and he's just not into it.
No, no, there's it's layers upon layers of meaning, and you can sort of find your own route through those layers. That, the narrative is very much open for interpretation, which is, very, that leads to a sort of much more complex feeling to the film.
And since you do work as an editor as well as a co-director and director, I mean, how do you respond to that structure? Is this always was this a touchstone in that first experience and opened your world up, or was it something that you picked up over the years?
No, no, I mean, it's definitely, it's definitely been, it was a very impactful experience seeing the film for the first time, which is why I wanted to, which I, why I chose it. And it's definitely been a kind of reference point for me all the way through my career. I haven't always worked on stuff that you can draw direct from Don't Look Now and and put it in, but I basically, it sort of opened my eyes to the freedom of filmmaking and really going with, it's something that people talk about a lot, but actually sometimes you need to sort of experience it to really understand it. And that is that film's an emotional, um, you know, format, and actually when you're editing, it's the best thing to do is kind of use your own emotion to kind of see what you want to cut to next. And you don't want to be, if you're too logical about it, you might go to the shot that makes logical sense, but for some reason, some other shot might feel better. And I think if you follow your feeling, you're always going to have a more emotional, impactful film, or whatever you're making, music video or anything, And I think I had the first kind of sense of that seeing Don't Look Now. And after that, I'd be working on a montage or something, and I think, I want to put this shot in. It's like, but it probably doesn't make sense, but it feels quite good. And when I sort of question myself, I would sort of drift back to Don't Look Now and be like, it's okay. They did it. They know what they're doing, and it's okay to go in that direction that is non-linear, non-logical, illogical, and just follow emotion and see where you go. And so yeah, that's something that I've really like to take into the projects I work on.
It is a fascinating power, the montage, the edit, that you can, was it the Kuleshov effect, where you just have the dog, the bird, and the dog, and the audience
Yeah.
will immediately conclude that the dog is looking at a bird or that wants the bird. It forces us to make connections that, the shots might have been taken on the same day or in the same country. There's no way to know anything. But with documentary and with historical documentary especially, you can create context and make connections simply through, it's not repetition exactly, but motifs of people doing the same thing in different locations over and over again. And I've been trying to figure out how it applies to one-to-one, because we know everything, right? Or we think we do, about John Lennon and Yoko Ono and their relationship. And of course we don't, right? Because we only know the historical record. We don't know anything that we haven't seen in some sort of package. So you and Kevin McDonald are given the opportunity to go through this footage, this stuff that hasn't been seen, that hasn't been consumed, I suppose,
Mhm.
by historians or the fan base or anything. What is your responsibility to that? Because you have the opportunity to create a completely alternative narrative if you so decide, by challenging us, right? By showing us things we've never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way we wanted to almost not force a narrative on the footage, but really create something that was, in reference to Don't Look Now, something that's an experience. to not really tell the logical story of that time necessarily. Obviously, that story comes out, but we wanted to give the audience the experience of getting to know John and Yoko in a deeper way than they had previously, and also to understand the time that they were living in. And really a big part of that is sort of just spending time with John and Yoko as they are, the way they are away from, the public eye, and also sort of seeing snatches, bits of, fragments of the time, but not in a way that we sort of shovel information at people. They can just really get a feel for the time. So we were again following emotion, and really not being so we weren't really preoccupied by information as such. And so in effect, we were trying to give people the experience of being there and being with John and Yoko. And we felt that people would take more from that than, a very structured, information heavy narrative.
I mean, it's the antidote to, I realize it's been over 50 years of people blaming Yoko Ono for breaking up the Beatles, which is still something that hangs around, even though it's been, debunked and disproven over and over and over again. The relationship that they had was, I'm always surprised by how tender it is, by how much understanding there was, by, it sounds so reductive, but by how, they could fight, but he was happy to be with her. He adored her in ways that you just didn't see in comparison to his public persona, where he was always the snarkiest one, and generally with good reason, because I've been on press junkets. I don't blame him at all for snapping at people, but there is something. It's become mythological, if that makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their relationship has been romanticized beyond human proportions.
Yeah.
And now, weirdly enough, just as the whole Natalie Wood casting in Don't Look Now would have been, now there's also this blanket of future tragedy. We know this won't last. We know what's coming. And yet, this is a decade before his murder, and he's just allowed to be a person for a little while. And you can see how happy she is with that too. Yeah, I guess that's what I mean when I'm asking about responsibility or to the historical narrative. Did you find something that surprised you in all of this?
I mean, I think we found a lot that was surprising. It's funny. Somebody asked me in a Q&A how my feeling for sort of Yoko had, or how did I feel differently about Yoko now? The question was specifically about Yoko, but I feel that really I didn't know John and Yoko really before I started this project. I sort of understood a two-dimensional image of them, from sort of the press and so forth. But, spending a year really kind of listening to interviews and reading and watching, and, I really kind of got to know them, and there were a lot of surprises. And I think we definitely felt a responsibility to express the truth as as it seemed to be, but without wanting to. How am I trying to put this? I mean, we didn't want to. We didn't want to sort of rehash what had already been, and so sorry, I'm I'm losing my track there.
No, I understand
that bit out. So sorry, I kind of, I don't quite, what do you mean by in your question? Do you mind just
No, of course. Yeah, I do that. I give people a lot of space. Was there something, I guess what I'm trying to get at was there something that surprised you about or that pushed back against your preconceptions that you debated including? Was there something that, maybe not something shocking, but just something that pushes against the narrative? Any kind of
when you said that of John and Yoko?
Yeah, as they were post.
No, I mean, I think I see. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yeah, I see what you mean about their relationship. You know what? like, no, actually, weirdly, that I mean, a we didn't keep anything kind of shocking out. Everything sort of went in. There was no sort of nothing like that. I mean, I think that they were really, really attached to each other. And I came to sort of understand some of the reasons that I felt that had happened. Like, I feel they both connected through the fact that they sort of had a sort of very different childhoods. One person coming from quite a rich family in Japan,
Mhm.
and the other essentially an orphan, although his he wasn't, but his parents weren't there, um and living with his aunt in Liverpool. But they both had very difficult childhoods, in that Yoko's parents had been very cold towards her, and John didn't have his parents there. And in his words, that gave him the blessing of not having parents. He realized that parents weren't God, and those were his words. And in effect, I guess what he was trying to say was that he could see that he could maybe step outside social conditioning a little bit. And I think that's exactly what happened to Yoko in her childhood. And you could see that, in her artwork, and I think you can see it in John's music. And I think when they met, they sort of recognized this in each other. There are many other things, but I think they both found someone who understood this about themselves, and they were very close, and I know the relationship had ups and downs, of course, but it essentially succeeded.
Yeah, it's a really nice tribute. I don't know how else to put it. To be able to see people as human, um, flaws and all, but still recognizably human, having come
Mm.
out the other side of that thing. Of the
I mean, I think they definitely are both people who recognize their own flaws as well. I mean, they did have flaws. I'm obviously, like, everybody has flaws. But I'm not trying to paint a sort of rosy picture of them, but an overly rosy picture. But they would be the first to admit that. And I think they were both people. I mean, Yoko still, but as a couple, I mean, who wanted to really improve themselves. They were looking for ways to be better people, and constantly on the lookout for this sort of thing. So that was another thing that they were kind of that made them a team.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out if there's a way I can tie it all back to Don't Look Now. I mean, it came out in 1973. There wasn't a clip of them going to see it or anything, was there?
No, well, it's funny, I because I was thinking about that they were probably filming Don't Look Now in 1972, so there is that comparison. But I mean, I think that we really, I don't know if I already kind of said it, but we actually spoke about Nicolas Roeg and Don't Look Now as a reference. And there's obviously a lot of montage in the one-to-one film. And if you look carefully, you can see that there's definitely some reference to specifically Don't Look Now in there. Actually, there's one montage where it's over a track by Yoko from the concert called Don't Worry Kyoko, and it's about her daughter that had been kidnapped by her ex-husband, and that is part of the reason that they came to America to find her daughter, which they actually never did till after John died. Um, but there was, we did this montage. We cut this montage over this sort of very emotional track of Yoko sort of singing to her daughter, um, and and in that we used a lot of footage of Kyoko when she was traveling with Yoko and John, Kyoko being Yoko's daughter. And in that montage, and you'll have to watch it again and tell me if you agree. But we've used definitely took inspiration from Don't Look Now, intercutting clips associatively. And there's one particular moment which we call the Don't Look Now moment. So there you go. I'll leave that as a clue, and see if you can pull it out there.
My thanks to Sam Rice Edwards, whose documentary One to One, John and Yoko, co-directed with his regular collaborator Kevin MacDonald, is in theaters in North America and the UK right now. Thanks also to Winnie Wong. She knows what she did. You can find Sam on Instagram at Sam Rice Edwards, all one word, no hyphen or dash, and you can find Don't Look Now on 4K, Blu-ray, and DVD from the Criterion Collection in a very fine special edition and streaming on Canopy in the US. It's also available to rent or buy on various VOD services across North America. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 41 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster as soon as you can. I'll see you next week.